hopefully you guys will have been looking at some different characters in the Bible so far, and how when life threw them really difficult things, they dealt with that and thinking about what we can learn from that. And tonight, we're going to be thinking about Joseph. I don't know if you guys, most of you might have heard about Joseph. He's the one that has a beautiful Technicolor dream coat. Lots of songs about him. I listened to the Joseph musical soundtrack on my way here today, like, yes, so ready. Has nothing to do with the talk, but there you go. Now, Joseph was a dreamer. Joseph literally got dreams from God. God gave him several dreams that gave him glimpses of his plan. I don't know why I'm getting this. It's as if I'm about to eat it. God gave Joseph little glimpses of his plan for what Joseph's life was going to be, for what God's plan for his chosen people was going to be. But at the time, Joseph only got little snippets. And just like we only saw little pictures, I told you it was tenuous, little pictures of people's face, at the time it looked like complete failure. It looked like everything had gone wrong in Joseph's life if you just took little snippets. But all along, God had the big picture, and God was at work throughout it all. So if you don't know the story of Joseph, I'm sorry, I've just ruined it. It's a happy ending, which I feel like is good to know when you're looking at a passage where it's like loads of really low moments. It will get better at the end. But yes, God was at work. He had the whole big picture. And throughout it all, God was reminding Joseph that he was with him and giving him little glimpses as we went along. So I thought tonight what we could do is just go through the whole story of Joseph, like whistle-stop tour. Don't worry, I'm not going to be here reading every single passage. And just pick out certain little bits of the story that might relate to us today. So Joseph is in the book of Genesis. Anyone know where Genesis is in the Bible? First book of the Bible, yes. Joseph's story is in the second half. And the second half of Genesis zooms in on one family in particular. And the granddad, his name is Abraham. Heard of Abraham? He has many sons. Many sons has Father Abraham? Yes, I'm one of them, and you are too. We won't sing it. It's okay. So his granddad is Abraham, and Abraham gets this promise from God. God promises, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bless your family. And through your family, you're going to bless all nations around, and all nations will know that I am your God. This is this massive promise that God gives to Abraham. And Abraham has one son, Isaac. And Isaac has two sons, one of which is Jacob. And Jacob is Joseph's dad. Don't worry, you don't have to remember the order, but it's good to know that Joseph's granddad or great-granddad is Abraham, and that's the big promise. Now, so we've got to remember, Joseph's story is part of this massive story of the second half of Genesis, this first calling of God to bless all nations in the world. And you would think, if God's going to pick a family to do that, right, they've got to be a pretty great family. They're going to have their lives sorted. It's all going to be perfect. They're going to get along beautifully. There's going to be no sibling rivalry. It's absolutely fine. But it couldn't be further from the truth. See, this family is completely dysfunctional. There are disagreements. There are arguments. There's favourite wives. There were many wives in that day. Favourite wives. There's brothers sleeping with sister-in-laws. I know, it's nuts. This family goes completely off the rails. And at each stage, you must think, God, surely you're going to give up with this family. But he continues to bring them back. He continues to save them from themselves at every single stage and at each generation. So from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to Joseph, God reminds them, no, I'm calling you to be a blessing. I'm calling you to be my people who I bless and bless others around you. So it's important to have that in the background when we start to look at Joseph. So have that in the background while we talk about the whole story. But into this story, in Genesis 37, Joseph comes in. And Joseph is 17. Any 17-year-olds here? Hands up. Nice. Joseph was your age. And Joseph is the second youngest son. He has 11 brothers. This one's a bit rare. Anyone got 11 brothers? No. Yes? No. Oh, it's a joke. I got really excited. He's the second youngest brother of 11 brothers. His mum was his dad's favourite wife. And Joseph is his dad's favourite. Now, he's not just subtle favourites. There's no I'll give him a little bit extra. He's my favourite. No, his dad buys him this extravagant, colourful coat and very publicly announces, this is my favourite son. And you can imagine, I don't know if you guys have siblings, you can imagine how that went down with his brothers. His brothers hated him. He was this annoying little brother that always got everything. Joseph was like a shepherd, but he just kind of helped the brothers. The brothers had to do the hard work. And Joseph just got to go along. And he often would go back to his dad and be like, the brothers aren't where they're meant to be. You told me to go look there and they were somewhere else. He's that kind of telltale brother that the brothers are a bit like, come on, Joseph. And he doesn't help himself. In fact, Joseph goes on to have 2 dreams. God gives him dreams in which all of his brothers are bowing down to him and the whole creation bowing down to him, which is an amazing dream. So Joseph is like, yes, God is calling me to be a leader. God is calling me to great things. And if I just follow this track, if I just keep going upwards and onwards, I'm going to have the most incredible life. So he goes, and rather arrogantly, he goes up to his brothers and he's like, guys, I've been given a dream. One day you are all going to bow down to me. God told me so. I don't know, who's got siblings? Anyone got a brother or sister? Yes, I've got an older sister. I don't know about you guys. If I went up to my sister and was like, Sarah, one day you are going to bow down to me. God has told me so. I'd probably be punched or tackled at least. It would not go down well. And this is, maybe not punched, that was extreme. Tackled, definitely. This is kind of the brothers' response, except for it is way more extreme. It escalates so quickly, which you'll see in a minute. So Joseph's at home with his dad, and his dad's like, you should probably go out and help your brothers. So he sends them off. Off Joseph goes, out to see his brothers, who are meant to be shepherding in one bit. They're not again, so he goes to the other bit. And as he's walking up in his fancy, beautiful, colourful coat, his brothers see him from way off, and they're like, guys, let's kill him. That's how fast it escalated. Let's just kill him. Let's get rid of him. See about his dreams then. We're all going to bow down to him? Whatever. When he's dead, we're not going to bow down to him. So he starting to walk over, and one of his older brothers, Reuben, luckily is a bit nicer, and he's like, guys, we don't want his blood on our hands. Let's just throw him into the pit. Let's just throw him into a well. It's just one over there. It's in the middle of nowhere. No one will know. And secretly, Reuben's thinking, oh, I can help him out later. I'll get him home. But then Reuben goes off to do something, leaving Joseph with the other brothers. So Joseph's thrown into this pit. He's got his cloaks torn off him by his brothers. And he's left in this pit to die. And then his brothers, I didn't notice this in the story until I was preparing this talk. His brothers sit down and have lunch. Like, you've just chucked your brother in the well, grabbed off his thing, and then they're just like, yeah, a bit peckish, let's have some lunch. And as they're eating, these slave traders come over. And they come by, and the brothers think, actually, we could get some money out of this. Let's get Joseph out of the well, which they do. They hand him over to the slave traders. And the slave traders take Joseph off into Egypt. It is sad, and it's super quick. It escalates so quickly. 1 minute, Joseph goes from being the favorite son, from being the one that God had given dreams to being dragged away into a foreign country, leaving his family behind, leaving his homeland behind. Meanwhile, his brothers have taken his coat, they've smeared it in animal blood, and they've taken it back to their dad, Jacob, and they've gone, we think he was eaten by a wild animal. And his dad's heart is completely broken. And the words that he says is, I will never recover from this. My heart will be broken, and I will mourn for Joseph forever until the day that I die. So that's that side. We're going to leave them in Canaan, and we're going to follow Joseph. So bear in mind, brothers are back in Canaan. Dad's heart is broken, and he thinks Joseph is dead. Meanwhile, I feel like it's a little trailer. Meanwhile, in Egypt, Joseph has been taken off. He's been sold into Egypt. He is a slave. Everything seems to have gone wrong that could be going wrong. And if we think back to that promise at the very beginning to his great-granddad, to his granddad, to his dad, and to him, that they were going to be a blessing and bless other nations, it looks like it's gone completely wrong. This family again and again and again have broken apart. They've been disobedient to God. They've wrecked their family that was meant to be blessed. It just seems like everything possible that has gone wrong has gone wrong. But Joseph's sold into this house of a second official. So he's the guy underneath Pharaoh in Egypt, like the second man. He's sold into his house. That's kind of good. It's like a pretty decent house to be sold into. And this guy's called Potiphar. Now, Potiphar is going to be important later on in the story, so remember his name. Yes, sorry, I was like, where am I? Have I gone off track? So they're in Potiphar's house, and Joseph has left his homeland behind. He's in a completely different culture. Think going from the most rural place in England ever, farming land, into central London to work as a slave. And you would think at that stage, Joseph is like, all right, God, I've given up with you. I'm completely alone. You have taken me away from the family that you blessed. But we see again and again, and it's a theme that comes out in this story. It's a verse. I'm going to make sure I read it properly. And I paraphrase the second half, so I apologize for that. There's a verse, and we first see it in Genesis 39, verse 2, which says, the Lord was with Joseph, so that he prospered. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, And this is a bit I've paraphrased. He was pleased with Joseph and put him in charge of the whole household and put everything he owned in Joseph's care. This is like the bit where Joseph seems most alone, and we're reminded, no, the Lord was with him. And not only was the Lord with him saying, I'm here with you, no, Joseph continued to work and do things, and the Lord said, I will bless the things that you do. And people noticed. This, for me, was a realization when preparing this talk, and just bear with me, because I had a deep spiritual moment as I was reading this text, and I was like, yes, Joseph is like Jennifer Lopez. Joseph is like J-Lo. It was a beautiful moment for me, and I will share with you why. I don't know how many of you guys know J-Lo. She was in Made in Manhattan. She sung a few songs. She became really popular in about 2000, a while ago, but massive fame. And she sang this song. I'm not going to sing it to you. I'll speak it like a spoken word poem. Don't be fooled by the rocks that I've got. I'm still Jenny from the block. Used to have a little, now I have a lot. Anywhere I go, know where I came from. Beautiful dancing. I will leave that to a singer later to sing it to you. Jennifer Lopez wanted people to know, no matter where she was now, no matter how famous she got, no matter how many magazines she was in, no matter how many interviews she did, how much money she earned, she wanted people to know, no, I'm still the girl that grew up in the Bronx neighborhood to a struggling family. And I know that that is who I am, and it's where I've come from, and I will carry that with me into here. I have not changed. Even if it looks completely different, that is who I am. Now, Joseph is like J-Lo, except it's like in reverse. So J-Lo went from rags to riches, and Joseph goes from riches to rags. But at every single stage of the journey, Joseph knows who he is, and he knows where he's come from. See, we hear in the story that Potiphar recognized that the Lord was with Joseph. The only way he could have done that is by Joseph talking about God. He was in a foreign culture. He was in a foreign place, a place that people didn't know about Yahweh, didn't know about the Israelites' God. So Joseph would have had to talk about it. He had to live in a way that showed that God was blessing him. He had to live in a way that God could work through. And at no stage did he go, all right, I'll just become Egyptian. I'll worship the gods that you worship. I'll do what you do. No, he was like, no, I'm Joseph. I'm from Israel. My God has chosen to bless us and bless the nations around us through us. I know who I am, and I know where I've come from. So that's going to be important. And we need to remember that verse, that the Lord was with Joseph, because that keeps popping up throughout this whole story. So, seems like everything's going a little bit better. Joseph is in charge of the whole household. He's been in charge of everything. It's pretty much like running the whole place of Potiphar. And it seems pretty good. And it's also getting pretty good because Joseph is described as well-built and handsome. Joseph is a good-looking man. My Bible says well-built and handsome. I looked up a different version. It says he was a goodly fellow. So he was very good-looking if you like Paul Dark talk. Goodly fellow. I quite enjoyed that. Joseph takes the fancy. No, Joseph doesn't take the fancy. Potiphar's wife takes the fancy to Joseph. She's like, okay, he's pretty good looking. He's well built. I'd quite like to sleep with him. So she goes up to him, and again, she's like, come to bed with me, come sleep with me. And Joseph is outright like, no, for two reasons. A, that would be so disrespectful to a man that has given me an incredible position. I used to be a slave, I used to be nothing, and he's put me in charge of his whole household. No. B, I follow God, and I know that this is not what God wants. I know who I am, I know where I've come from, and this is not Yahweh's choice. This is not who I am. So he literally avoids her. He runs away from her, and she is a rich and powerful woman. She could have real influence. But again and again, he flees. Eventually, she corners him, and she grabs onto his coat, and he runs away. And she manages to keep his coat, or his cloak, or whatever he was wearing as a slave. And she is so livid that again and again he has rejected her, that she goes to her husband and she's like, look what your slave tried to do to me. Your slave tried to sleep with me. And Potiphar is furious and sends Joseph to prison. So Joseph has gone from being the favorite son, the chosen one, dreams from God, thinking his life was on a huge trajectory, to being thrown in a well, completely betrayed by his family, sold into slavery, taken into a different culture, made the top slave, got completely falsely accused to trying to sleep with someone, and got thrown into prison because of it. And again, at this stage, if we'd just seen a little snapshot of Joseph's life, like it literally can't get lower. Like there's nowhere worse to be in Joseph's situation now. He's literally at the bottom. But even in here, we hear again in Genesis 39, verse 21. While Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. And the warden goes on to put Joseph in charge of the prison and has no worries because Joseph takes care of everything. The Lord was with him and he succeeded in all he did. Again, we see that Joseph doesn't just sit back and goes, okay, I'm obviously at the bottom here. I'm obviously at the lowest. Lord, I give up. Joseph still continues to work to his best ability for God. He continually gives glory to God. And God blesses that, and God works with him in that. When he seems to be at his most alone and at his lowest, God reminds him, no, I'm with you in this, and I'm going to prosper what you do. And while he's in prison, he gives Joseph gifts. He gives Joseph the gift of dream interpretation. So Joseph was the one that got dreams. Now Joseph is the one that solves dreams. And in there's two guys with him in prison, a cupbearer and a baker. If the picture's up, they've got really dodgy moustaches in the picture, I apologize. The cupbearer and the baker, and they have these dreams, and Joseph is able to interpret them, not because he can do it in his own strength, but he's learned. He says, actually, no, I can't do this, but God can. I'll ask my God. And he correctly interprets them, and both the baker and the cupbearer go out. Unfortunately, the baker is quite awfully killed. If you read the story, you'll find about how that works. And the cupbearer is raised to a position of Pharaoh again. He goes and serves Pharaoh as his cupbearer. And Joseph thinks, yes, this is my way out. He will remind Pharaoh that I can interpret dreams and that I'm good, I was wrongly accused. But he stays in there for 2 more years, 2 years of waiting in jail, and we hear nothing more of what happens in that time. Joseph is there waiting. But actually, God was preparing a leader in Joseph at that time. He's given authority. He learns administrative skills. And later on, he's really going to need that as a leader. I won't give it away. I was about to give it away as a leader later on. But God is already beginning to mold him and shape him there. 2 years later, Pharaoh has these crazy, crazy dreams about cows and water, and the cows are skinny and the cows are fat. And he's like, I have no clue what to do. He calls his advisors and he's like, do you know what this means? They're like, oh, not really. And then the cupbearer is like, yes, I know this guy, Joseph. He's in prison and he can work out dreams. So Pharaoh calls Joseph up. And Joseph goes to him and he says, you know what, I can't do it, Pharaoh, but God can. I'm going to ask my God, I'm going to ask Yahweh to solve your dreams, help you work out what they mean. And he does. God is faithful to Joseph. And Joseph hears that there's going to be 7 years of plenty. There's going to be so much food for 7 years, and then there's going to be 7 years of famine. There's going to be no food for 7 years. And Joseph explains this to Pharaoh, and he says, okay, you know what you need to do is you need to gather up all the food for 7 years, put it in store barns, and then we can ration it out. And Pharaoh acknowledges again, he says, I can see that the Lord's Spirit is in you. I can see that God is with you. I can see that you are wise. And for that reason, I'm going to put you in charge. I'm going to put you as second in command. And I want you to look over all of this stuff while it happens. So Joseph goes from prison to second in command in Egypt. It's like this massive roller coaster the whole way through Joseph's life. So he gets taken up to the second in command. And you might be thinking, but what's happened to his family back in Canaan? Or you can think, yeah, good riddance. Joseph's doing well. Joseph has a family of his own in Egypt. He marries and he has kids. And they're in Egypt, but his brothers are still in Canaan. And because of the famine, they get brought up to Egypt. They are starving. They have no food. So they come up and they stand in front of Joseph and ask him for food. And they don't recognize who he is. But Joseph recognizes them. And I think quite wisely, Joseph doesn't just go like, brothers, it's me, Joseph. He actually puts them through a few tests just to think, okay, where are you? How have you changed? What's going on? There's lots of to and froing, lots of different things. And eventually Joseph thinks, yes, actually they have changed. Their hearts are different. And I want them to know that I'm their brother. And this bit's a super emotional bit of the story. His brothers come again to Egypt, and Joseph literally can't contain himself. He has to send out anybody that's not his family in the room. He sends them out. And it says he wept so loudly that the Pharaoh's household and the Egyptians around heard. Joseph is like uncontrollably weeping. And it's not a case of his bitterness or his anger, because I mean, could be if that's what you'd come back to. Joseph has fully forgiven his brothers. And he says, it's me, it's Joseph, is my father alive? And his brothers are just like, flip. Like, we're coming to him for food, we're going to starve. He's going to kill us. we're going to be in prison. Like, they're just silent, absolutely silent. And Joseph says, come to me. It's your brother Joseph, the one that you sold into Egypt. And he is completely pouring out his love on his brothers. He sends them back with plenty of food. And he says, please bring my father back. Come back, live here, settle. We'll give you land. He doesn't just forgive them, but he goes on to try and reconcile with them to bring their family back together. See, although it looked like failure all the way along, God's work was throughout it all. And actually, not only did God fulfill his promises to Joseph, but God is fulfilling his promises back to Abraham. See, in bringing the family up to Egypt, this is going to be the place where that family, that nation grows, where it multiplies. So not only is that vision that Joseph had of his brothers coming forward, and they do literally bow down to him when they come up for their food, but God is beginning to fulfill his whole promise back to Abraham to bless his family and to make them a great nation. So that's our whistle-stop tour through Joseph. I'm sorry if it was like, oh yeah, there's the brothers. Oh, also, it's really lovely, the reunion between Joseph and his dad. If you have time, go and have a little read. It's beautiful. Jacob just doesn't believe it for a while. And then he's like, my son who I thought was dead. It's amazing. It could be like a proper good movie end. Yes. Where are we? Cool. God didn't immediately fulfill the promises that he had made to Joseph. Joseph had to wait, and Joseph had to go through a huge amount of trials, tests, low moments. But through it all, we had those recurring verses that the Lord was with Joseph, and that in everything he did, he helped him to prosper and to succeed. And I want to hold on to those as we go forward into the rest of our story, because I think there's three things that I want to pull out for us. The first two might sound a bit generic, but I want to delve into them a little bit. So the first one is that God fulfills his promises. If there's one thing from this story that is so clear, it's that God always keeps his promises. Not only did God keep his promises to Joseph, as we've heard, God kept his promise to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to Joseph, and he continues to do that all the way through. And at no stage does God give up. At no stage does God go, I've had enough of this family. He continues to forgive when they do things that are absolutely ridiculous. To be honest, they do some things that I'm like, that is unforgivable. But God continues to say, no, you are my people, and I have chosen you, and I will forgive you if you turn back to me. And it happens again and again, and it happens throughout the Bible, not just in this story. But God is so faithful to the people that he has promised to. So he forgives, he keeps his promises. Oh, yes, I put, with God, no situation is wasted, no circumstance. If you feel like actually I'm in a situation that God can't redeem, I think if there's anything from this story as well, that is something that God just says again and again. He takes things that look completely unredeemable, things that look like complete failures, and he turns it into his success. In fact, the last bit of the whole story of Joseph says to his brothers, because when his dad dies, his brothers think, okay, his dad's gone, Joseph's now going to really come back to us, because he was just pretending this whole time. And Joseph says, no, what you intended to harm me, what you intended for evil, God used for good, to save lives. Like what you thought you were doing, which was so evil, actually God has used. There's nothing that we can do, no situation that is too big for God to change around, to use for his purposes, and also to draw us closer to him. So it's point one, God always fulfills his promises, always keeps his promises. Point two, we can trust that God is at work in the chaos, even when we cannot see it. While we were worshipping just earlier, I was like, yes, band, choice person, whoever you were. These songs are so apt. Because in all of these, in the waves that keep hitting and keep going, it can feel like God is completely nowhere to be seen. It can feel like we are completely alone. It can feel like there is darkness all around us and we don't know where God is. And I think, again, this story says, even in the chaos, God is working and he is using it for his purposes. There was the psalm that Rich read that says, even in the shadow of death, you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me, which is an amazing verse. But I actually think there's a really awesome verse just before that says, you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. Like in the midst of trial, in the midst of chaos, in the midst of when it feels like nothing worse could happen, God prepares this table and is like, come and sit and eat with me. Let me anoint you. Let me overflow your cup with joy. I'm with you in whatever situation. While your enemies are surrounding you, let's sit and eat. Come be with me because I'm with you. Like there is no chaos that God is not in and not using. I wanted to just kind of, I guess it's jumping off what Rich was saying, actually. For some people that seems like, yeah, that's really easy to say and not so easy in the situation I am in. And I don't want to belittle that at all. I think there are some situations where actually we look back on and we can say, yeah, I can see God at work. But there are other situations where we don't understand. And I'm not going to pretend you will always understand where God is at work later on, because I don't think you always do. But we can hold on to those promises, and we can hold on to that trust that God is with us, even when we cannot see it. And even when we cannot see how this could ever be good, we can trust that God is using it, and God is using it to draw us closer to him and to fulfill his purposes. And there's just two things that I kind of wanted to say. If you are in that place, first off, like one of the things I find really helpful if I'm in a bit of a place like that is just to spend each day, at the end of the day, just take 2 minutes and run through the day step by step with no judgment. Don't judge what's happened or conversations you've had. Don't put any blame on yourself. Just ask God, where were you at work in each moment of today? Where can I see you? It might not be in your life, but it might be in lives of people around you. Where can I see you at work? Just to begin to acknowledge, actually, yes, God is here. And then the second thing is, Rich mentioned the book of Psalms. It's near the middle of the Bible. If you have a Bible, kind of flick to the middle and you'll find a book called the book of Psalms. And there's some really cool psalms in there of songs of praises and songs of joy. And there's also poems and songs where people are just pouring their hearts out to God. Why have you abandoned me? Why am I in this depth of this place? Where are you, God? I am completely alone. And actually, I find those really helpful, because sometimes when I'm in that place, I don't know where God is and I don't even know how to pray to him. And sometimes those psalms can give you the words. You can actually say, okay, God, and at the end of them as well, they declare that God is still God, that God is king over each situation, even when it feels like all of these things. And I think that's super helpful as well. So those are two things. If you are in those places, give them a go. They might not work, and if they don't work, that's not God's promise. That's me saying that helps me. But just trust. I just encourage you guys to trust that God is with you, even when it feels like he's not. So we've had God always keeps his promises, and we can trust that God is at work in the chaos, even when we cannot see it. And then if you remember nothing else, please remember that Joseph is like Jennifer Lopez. Joseph is like J-Lo. In every situation, in every person that he met, people recognized God's work in Joseph's life because of what he did, because of what he said, because of who he was. He never forgot who he was. He never forgot where he came from, and he never forgot that promise of God to his family. And I just want to encourage you guys that you might be like, yeah, but I don't know what promise God has made me. I don't know who I am. I don't know where I've come from, apart from I'm Kath and I'm from Guildford. I want to tell you guys tonight that we've sung these things tonight. That you are chosen by God. You are part of his family. Actually, when we choose to follow God, he adopts us into his family. We become the child of the King of all kings, the King who's above everything, above every single situation. We can know that that is who we are, and that our God is with us in every single step. That is who I am, and it's where I'm from. I'm from the family of God. This whole story of Joseph is part of my story, because it shows me that my God is faithful, that my God keeps his promises, that my God is at work in the chaos, and that actually I'm called to live that out, that I'm called to be like J-Lo too, not just Joseph. So I'll leave that with you guys. I've probably spoken for a bit too long, but thank you for listening, and I'll pass over to Rich.